Sounds good. Thank you.
So Jason currently serves as a restoration project manager for the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program, where he is responsible for management and oversight of restoration-related activities and coordinating Science Advisory Committee, or SAC, recommendations of data needs and gaps to further develop environmental monitoring that informs us about the status and trends of coastal Alabama's biological condition. A native of Mobile, Jason grew up in awe of everything life among the coast affords. He holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of South Alabama and a Master's of Science from the University of Alabama. Eager to put his fascination of Earth processes to work, Jason ventured out to live in the pristine wilderness of America's national parks as a ranger for the National Park Service. In early 2015, while managing a remote, off-grid field station in the heart of Utah's Red Rock Country, Jason decided it was time to return home to serve the natural resources and communities of coastal Alabama, a place he cares deeply for. So thanks for joining us today, Jason, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. It is great to see some of you that I've met once again. I hope everyone's doing well during all this craziness. This is, I think we'll look back on this in our lives as one of the most interesting periods as far as disruption of everyday society and really interesting stuff. I've been working from home for about 2.5 months now, and I know you guys are just kind of getting back out in the field and you're eager to do that. And I think it's really cool that you're having all these presenters come in, and whether it be someone like me trying to share some knowledge from a previous life or on a particular subject, I think we can always soak in information that we receive from others. Hopefully you guys are like me, sponges, and you love to have information thrown at you. So what my goal is today is to share some of my experiences with the National Park Service. I was able to be a ranger for several years. And it was really one of the greatest times of my life. I miss it all the time. Actually digging through a lot of these pictures really put back a lot of memories. And but I'm glad to be back in Mobile as well, working with great groups and partners like yourself. You know, there's so much work to do here. I was born and raised here, and I really care about this place. So to come full circle and leave and experience all these things, but at the same time grow my appreciation for this beautiful place that we call coastal Alabama, and hopefully continue to do that the rest of my career. So I'm going to jump right into it to save time. I will tell you, I'm going to turn the camera off. I got some cheap internet because I'm thrifty. I don't have that Google super bandwidth. And, you know, I'm not going to be able to see the chat box probably, but if there's a hand raise function or y'all want to interrupt, that's fine. I'm going to try to touch on a lot of things, so some of it's going to come at you fast. I wasn't really sure how to present this information. It's so much. You're talking about years of my life, which I'm still young, but every year, you know, things change. And like I said, seeing these pictures, I was like, wow, look at this place. So what I'm going to try to do is jump into the parks that I worked at, what the positions were at those parks, what some of the duties were, and then also share little nuggets of information as I go through that hopefully makes sense to you guys and show you the diversity of jobs out there, show you some of the tools even towards the end that I hope that you can utilize to increase your ability to maybe land one of these jobs. So, all right. Cutting the webcam. And does everyone see the screen, the slideshow okay? And the head nods? All right, perfect. So, you know, I used the term America's Best Idea. I didn't come up with that. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Ken Burns. He's probably the #1 documentary director, producer of our time. He's done baseball, jazz, the war, you know, Vietnam, the Dust Bowl, West, but he did one in 2009, right after I got started with the Park Service, called America's Best Idea. And it's that concept of, you think about the national parks are these jewels of the world. They're places that we set aside. We created the model for putting beautiful places, cultural significance, historical significance aside, that belongs to everyone. So it doesn't matter race, creed, economic stature. These are places that we all have a vested ownership and interest in. And I think that term, America's Best Idea, rings so true when you think about our country. So again, just to reiterate, what I'm trying to do today is to share with you some of the parks. So there's a wow factor to that. I could go on for hours about the interesting stories behind some of these parks, because that's the idea, is they were selected to be national parks for a particular reason. The same way as the place I work for, the National Estuary Program, we're one of 28 national estuaries across the nation because Mobile was deemed as an estuary of national significance. So where you're doing all your work is an important place to the country, and so are these national parks. Then we're going to get into a little reflection, so hopefully give you some nuggets to take forward and venture into this career path, and then open for questions throughout. So my journey with the Park Service started in 2008. As was mentioned, I went to the University of South Alabama, got a bachelor's, went to Alabama, got a master's. Keep that in mind, a master's or even a bachelor's in some cases isn't mandatory. I went ahead to graduate school thinking, I'm going to get this master's. It'll really give me a leg up in any field I decide to go in. But I knew I wanted to go into the National Park Service. But I will tell you, one of the things that I've learned right off the top is on-the-ground experience can be just as valuable as that education to get your foot in the door. And I think the work that you're doing now and the experience that you're gathering is that type of on-the-ground experience that can propel you into some of these positions. So now, granted, that advanced degree is paying dividends on the back end. It's allowed me to increase in leadership, increase salary down the road, hopefully, yada, yada. There are some advantages, but I will tell you that I learned just as much can be done from the work you're doing now or volunteering as spending that extra 2 years and going to school for that degree. So I get on side tangents when the thoughts hit me, so y'all bear with me. So I started in 2008 when I finished at Alabama. And so I had this master's degree. I'm like applying for these jobs, nothing's shaking out. Well, I decided to take a volunteer position at Big Cypress National Preserve. And Big Cypress is a wonderful park. So if you're familiar with South Florida, of course, you've heard of the Everglades. You maybe heard of the Dry Tortugas and the Keys, Biscayne over off of Miami. But a lot of people don't know about Big Cypress National Preserve. It was actually the first national preserve created. Actually, two were created on the same day, Big Thicket in Texas and Big Cypress National Preserve. And it's a really interesting place. It's actually 729,000 acres. So you're talking about the size of Rhode Island, just right there in South Florida, next to 1.5 million acres of the Everglades. So when you think about South Florida in the area that's surrounded by other state parks and wildlife preserves, I mean, they've protected, well over 2 million acres of beautiful South Florida tropical savanna habitat down there. It's an amazing place if you've never been in general. So there's a lot of park opportunities down there in general. And I will tell you, the winters are beautiful. It is no rain for 6 months, 80, 85 degrees. I mean, it is picturesque. So these are more winter parks. As we talk about these park positions, you're either a seasonal ranger where you work during the busy season of a given park, or you're a permanent ranger where you work 12 months of the year. You have to, unless you get really lucky, you're probably going to be a seasonal ranger for some time. But that's not a bad thing because you're there when it's the best time of year. You're there when the tourists are there. And if you're lucky, you can go to another park in the off season. So you think like a park like Glacier isn't really kicking in the winter because that's when it's so snowed in no one can even go. But if you're down in South Florida or Joshua Tree in the desert hanging out in the winter, and then you go to a beautiful place like Yellowstone or any of the Utah parks or in the Glacier or something in the summer, you can kind of get this rotation going. And that's a pretty cool way to live. You kind of continue to move from park to park. and you're building up your stock in yourself. You're building up your credentials. You're building up your experience to land one of those more permanent positions. So keep that in mind. So Big Cypress, again, just a huge part. And why I'm showing you this map is because I wanted to just touch on why it's so interesting there. You think about, for one, Big Cypress isn't really fed by any major rivers. So the watershed itself is actually sustained by rainfall, which makes it a unique system. Because it's a national preserve, you can hunt inside of it. There are actually active oil operations. There are private inholdings. If you held property before it was made a national preserve, you were able to retain that property. And there's also traditional and cultural uses such as off-road vehicles. So they have swamp buggies. You're allowed to ride ATVs. Now, all this is managed in a responsible way, but you can have those things inside of this. And there's multiple distinct habitats in Big Cypress just due to small elevation changes. So when you see the red lines that I popped up, you think about the northern end of the park has a little higher elevation where you may have, you may be 20, 40 feet above sea level, where you have more of your hardwood hammocks, your traditional looking forests, your pine savannas. There's freshwater marshes. There are cypress habitat. Obviously, it's Big Cypress. And then you get into the southern end where it's more of your mangrove habitat, where you think of that more key type environment, where you've got the mangrove forest, the manatees. That aquatic life is rich. So it's just really a unique part. And you're also close to a city called Naples down there, which is a nice place to be. Naples is kind of a swanky retirement area, more golf courses per capita. But you're also close to Fort Lauderdale and Miami and the Keys. So when you think about any of these parks, think about what's in relation to them, whether it be you want to go on your weekend to explore somewhere else. What are your amenities to shopping, flights home to see your family that are going to be reasonable. So, and I will say that everything that happened to me getting all of these parks and all of these jobs, half of it was luck, half of it was skill. Some of these parks I didn't even know about till I went to them, and they were such a blessing, and Big Cypress was certainly on that. So I went to volunteer.gov, and I'm going to share more of that with you later, and found a volunteer position. So here I am with a master's degree, thinking I'm ready to go out and make $40,000, $50,000. I took an internship at this park for $150 a week. But that $150 a week was nothing compared to the experience I gained and just the opportunity that it allowed. And so, I was working full-time, 40 hours a week. They provide housing. That's something I'll go ahead and tell you right now that is important to me when I was looking at a park was, did they provide housing? Now, you pay a little bit of rent for that housing, but that's so much easier to know you're going to move across country. You don't have to find an apartment, a place to live. They have it all ready for you. Now, it is shared housing, so you're going to be in like a dorm type feel. You're going to have to learn to get along with some people and share spaces, but you do have your own room. And that can have its advantages as well, just getting in the community of a park and sharing those things. So now I will say parks that don't have shared housing or provide housing may be more likely to get you a job because there's not as many candidates interested in a position like that. I actually turned down a position one time with the parks just because they didn't have housing. I was moving into a remote area of New Mexico, and I was like, that's a little too much to do for just 6 months. It'd be different if it was a year or longer position, when you think about getting leases. And so that's some of the challenges you deal with. But if they've got housing provided, you show up, everything's gravy. So Big Cypress is just huge sweeping landscapes, and you can see the little bumps. See those bumps where you see in the actual white spots, that's cypress domes. And where you see the tallest trees in the center actually mean that was the deepest hole in the ground. So it's holding water throughout the year that allows those cypress trees to grow taller. So think about Swiss cheese. You think about all the holes in it. Those holes represent areas where those cypress trees and cypress domes are going to thrive in that limestone rock because they hold more water. And then you see that pine savanna habitat where it's little bumps in the road. where it was just high enough to keep that marsh and cypress dry so those pine communities could sustain. So pretty interesting how small, I'm talking about foot changes in elevation, can make an entirely different habitat. And this is also the home of the Florida panther. And so you think about they would be roaming around this type of community. Pretty cool. Tons of wildlife down there from, we're used to seeing alligators, but you got to think people come around the world. You have these expansive marl freshwater prairies that are dry part of the year and wet part of the year. And you see a cypress dome in the back. And then you see these little dwarf cypresses in the front. These are little stunted cypress because they don't live in that wet environment like you see down here when you guys are working in Weeks Bay or something near the river where you see all this cypress. But it's just unobstructed views. That was something I wanted, I just wanted to see as far as I could possibly see. See these little puffy cumulus clouds, flat as a board as you see. But just a beautiful place. And there's a little shot into a pine savanna. And then into a cypress swamp. These cypress swamps, they're full of air plants and orchids, and the water is crystal clear. And you do what's called a swamp walk, where you actually take groups out into these cypress swamps, and you're just wandering around. And there's beautiful turtles and little fish and minnows, and there's wildlife all around you. And there's snakes, and there's obviously alligators, but it's not one of those really where you feel unsafe. It's just a really peaceful environment. It's a wonderful experience. Something you really can't do here in our Delta unless it flooded, and then it just isn't quite the same as the sheet flow of water over the Big Cypress watershed in the Everglades. So my job down there, what I did is I worked for an environmental education program called SWAMP, the Swamp Water and Me program. And I've always had an interest in education. I taught at Alabama as part of my master's degree. I'm just really enjoy sharing information and opening people's eyes to new things. And so this was a great environmental education, experiential learning program where we actually took every sixth grader in the county out on a field trip. So they would come out to the park. We would take them actually out into those cypress swamps and out into those marshes and out into those pinelands and do experiments with them. They would net minnows and identify them. We would do water quality tests. We would do weather tests. We would do soil tests. All of this was a curriculum-based program. But it was just amazing to see these kids' eyes light up. And you're talking about kids from wealthy communities, kids from agricultural communities. We were talking about children from Guatemala and Honduras who barely spoke English, who had just moved with their families to this community to get away from whatever was going on back where they were from and to start a new life. And then to see all these kids come out there and never have been out to the swamp, and it was in their backyard, literally a 30-minute ride. It was really an interesting experience. And so there were so many facets to this program. I did work at Baykeeper for a time and helped start their swamp program. So I was really interested in trying to see this experiential learning program even here in our own community. And that's a great program. And I hope it continues to grow and thrive. So I was an intern at this point, but I was working with other general park rangers. These were park rangers who were making about $15 an hour, which is $30,000 a year, which is good money when you consider you don't have a lot of rent and overhead, and it's certainly enough to survive on. This was called a 0025 park ranger, general park ranger position. And, it dealt with a lot of kids. So if you're going to be in an environmental education world, you need to know that you have patience. You need to be a leader and put forth a good example for these kids. But there's a lot of positions in the Park Service that have an environmental education or interpretation component. I encourage you guys to look up interpretation. And by that, I don't mean language. I mean, there's actually a field of study called interpretation now. You can get a degree in it. And that's very important in the Park Service in a frontline position working with the public, is you're trying to take a complex resource or a complex cultural issue and water that down or share it with someone in a way that they connect with it. So you're trying to share the tangible. Hey, here's a beautiful habitat, with the intangible. How does it make you feel? How does it make you think about nature? And doing that is a skill set. So I'll talk about interpretation as we go on, but I encourage you to look up that, and learning some of those tenets of interpretation can go a long way in helping you get your foot in the door with the Park Service. So when you're in any job, particularly an internship, and you've got a great leader, they're going to give you opportunities to learn new things. In addition, you know, you're working for $150 a week, so they're going to try to help you out to gain other skills. Well, back in 2008, 2009, I was lucky enough to get my red card. And I know you guys were able to get your red cards. And it would be many years before I would ever use it. But that 40-hour class that they allowed me to do was a great experience and something I was interested in. And so I know some of you are interested in prescribed burning. I will say that Big Cypress has the largest prescribed burning program in the National Park Service. So they burn about 70,000 acres a year, about 10% of the park. And so that's a really cool thing. I wanted to get more into fire and just was never given the opportunity. I loved being out there on a crew. Again, many years later, I'll share that I actually got to go on a fire for once. But that's a great skill, and there's tons of not only national park jobs, but Forest Service jobs and Bureau of Land Management jobs where you have fire crews. So, you know, you may have to start out as a grunt, but there's a lot of opportunity there, particularly when you think about forestry management and just wildfires with your hotshot crews and stuff. So after I left Big Cypress, I started applying for Park Service jobs like crazy, you know, and I actually was offered one in New Mexico at a cultural site, but again, I turned it down because I was just a little too uncomfortable with moving across country and finding an apartment. So I landed a job at Sequoia. I got a call one day. I had backpacking experience. I had experience hiking and navigation. You know, some of the things y'all have learned, you know, understanding a GPS, understanding a compass. How do you feel in nature? Are you comfortable camping? Do you feel like, you know, you could give people directions on trails? Would you just be safe in the wilderness? And those skills paid off. And the supervisor hired me at Sequoia National Park to be what was called a trailhead ranger. Now, the technical term as far as the national park system, I was called a visitor use assistant. But I was a trailhead ranger where people who wanted permits to do backcountry hiking came to us at our desk. They got their permits. We sent them out into the wilderness, but then we also got to patrol those trails, and was lucky enough that basically 7 out of every 10 days work, I got to be out on the trails, either staying overnight or just hiking the day use trails, talking to visitors, giving advice. Hey, where are you? What's going on? Picking up litter, checking on campfire rings. It's probably the most amazing job just because you were getting paid to experience the Sierra Mountains. In Kings Canyon, Sequoia Park is to the south of Yosemite. So when you think about California, it's kind of right in the middle of the spine of the Sierra Mountains that run down California. One of the most beautiful places on earth. I lived at a lodgepole campground. Again, I had housing, lived at 7,000 feet. And the first day I showed up in May, it was about this time. It was already snowing again. So they had a late spring snowstorm. But just an amazing place. And again, the essence of my job was to be out in that backcountry or in those front country trails, just experiencing the wilderness, but then making sure that folks were doing what they were supposed to be doing. Again, just interacting, general duties. Now, there was a formality when you're dealing with the Park Service. This was actually a job under the Division of Law Enforcement. So in the Park Service, you've kind of got 5 main divisions that each park has. You have your administrative. Those are the people who are making stuff happen. You have your division of interpretation. That's the people working with the tourists. You have your division of law enforcement and protection. So that's safety of the resources, safety of the people. You have your natural resources or resource management. That's your biologist, your hydrologist, your geologist. And then you have your maintenance crews. Those are the folks making sure that the place is running smoothly and looks good. So all of those have job opportunities. This one, particularly with the trailheads, was with the Division of Visitor Protection. Wonderful opportunity, though. If you've never been to Sequoia and seen the large trees, sequoias are bigger than redwoods. Redwoods are taller. Sequoias are bigger by volume. You see the people in the background. I mean, these trees were as big around as a pickup truck. They were just immense. And so to be able to just wander around within them and walk in this alpine habitat. So this was like a lake I camped on, and I just want to show you the vastness. So this is a lake I camped on in an area called the Tablelands. And this was cross country. This wasn't on trails. This was just making your route. You just see it was this just beautiful meadows, crystal clear water. You could drink right out of it. And then this is the view looking down on that. So you see that lake and that meadow. You just see how vast that was. And you just pick your route and hike across something like this. It's just it's a feeling like no other. Even if you don't get a job, I encourage you to just go experience something like this. It's just amazing to see something that you know is always going to be there in the state you saw it in, and just so visually stunning. The wildflowers at all of these places. I was never a birder or a flower person, but the amount of wildflowers in Sequoia and Big Cypress, and then when I get to Utah, it's just amazing. So I left Sequoia. I was going to go back in 2010, take my same job, best job I ever had, hiking the Sierra Mountains. Well, BP oil spill hit. I was from here. I started freaking out. I grew up around Dauphin Island. My parents live there right now. And I was thinking, this place that I love is going away forever. Now we know, hindsight, it was impacted and things were hurt. But the Gulf is resilient and it's started to heal. And now we know that all those billions of dollars are being put to good use, just like on a program like Gulf Corps, putting that back into the community in restoration and conservation jobs. So anyways, I took a risk and stayed here in Alabama and was lucky enough to get a job at Gulf Islands National Seashore. Now, if you're familiar with the National Seashore, it's in Florida and Mississippi. I worked on the Mississippi district over in Ocean Springs. And they have islands offshore called Ship Island, Horn, Petty Boy. You got to take a boat to get out there, but they also have an area on land called Davis Bayou. And I did something very similar to what you guys are doing. I was the lead of a youth conservation corps, and I would encourage you, just like you look up SCA that you work for through Gulf Corps, there is the Youth Conservation Corps that the National Park Service runs. And it's usually an 8 to 12-week program where they hire youth 15 to 18 years old to work full-time. So I was in charge of a crew doing handwork. So I've been there with y'all removing invasives and clearing trails and doing that type of work. So I ran this crew during the oil spill, a little ragtag motley crew, and it was a great experience for me. I was able to mentor some of these kids. Some of them went on to get jobs in the park. Some of them went on to do other things. But not only did we just do hard work, I tried to take care of these guys. I took them on field trips. We went to the Explorium. We went to the Stennis Space Center. I wanted to provide an educational component. As you guys know, if you work 40 hours all week in the field pulling popcorn trees, that'll burn you out. And I know that Gulf Corps does a good job of providing you training opportunities. So Youth Conservation Corps, doing some of the work you're doing, there's opportunities to transition that into a National Park Service position. So just keep that in mind. And Gulf Islands is the closest National Park Service unit to Mobile and coastal Alabama. So, I was never lucky enough to get a full-time position at those, but I always wanted to move home and work at the park so I could still live in Mobile with my family near and commute. That wasn't in the cards, but everything still worked out, luckily. Now, during the oil spill, at the very end of it, after the Conservation Corps was over, I was able to join the incident command team of the oil spill as a public information officer for Gulf Islands. So that was a cool experience. I did get to contribute in some meaningful way throughout the oil spill, even though I wasn't out there cleaning up every bit of oil I saw. But oil was out there, guys. I don't know. I know y'all are younger, but you certainly had to remember everything that was going on with the oil spill. It was a big deal, you know. It was, I'd never seen so many resources brought to bear to try to tackle a challenge. Eventually, you know, these islands were wilderness, so they weren't allowing mechanical equipment on them, and they eventually used these beach sifters. This is what they clean Orange Beach and Gulf Shores with. You know, the tourists don't want to see seaweed on the beach. It looks ucky. So they go at night and they clean the beach sometime, but they were actually able to use this piece of equipment to scoop up all the oil that was sitting on the beach. So here you see just a pile of oil-laden debris. There was, you know, fortunately we weren't impacted as much as the marshes in Louisiana, but there was a lot more oil here than people realize. So I leave Gulf Islands. That season ended. I'm skipping this here, but I went back to Big Cypress in the winter of 2010. So remember, I was that intern first. Well, I did a good job. My supervisor appreciated the hard work that I put in, and lo and behold, she hired me back as a real park ranger. So Sequoia was my first real job in the Park Service. But remember, that internship for $150 a week opened all those doors for me. It showed that I was committed to putting in that work and to use what I could learn to my advantage. I wasn't complaining about being broke. I was trying to maximize my opportunity. That's all you got to ask for is an opportunity. So anyways, I went back to Big Cypress in the winter of 2010, spring 2011, and worked a whole nother season there and actually took on a supervisory role with that education program and kind of ran the show underneath my direct supervisor. So that was a great opportunity. So fast forward from there, because I did the exact same job with the swamp program, I was able to go to Capitol Reef in 2012. And, you know, if you know anything about Utah, they have a lot of parks. You hear people talk about Zion and Arches and Canyonlands, but one of the least known parks, in my opinion, happens to be the most beautiful. It has all of the things that those places has. It has arches, it has natural bridges, it has cliffs, it has Navajo sandstone, it has hoodoos, and in addition to that, it has fruit orchards, and that's a blessing in itself to have a fruit orchard. So Capitol Reef is a geologic paradise, you know, but it's also a rich cultural park because there were Native Americans that lived there from the ancestral Puebloans to the Utes and Paiutes of Utah history. So you have, you know, almost a millennia of cultural resources in this park where people had lived in it way before we ever did. And it was really interesting to me, being a physical geographer. I was always interested in the physical side of things. But the more I went to these parks, I started to embrace and find interest in those cultural stories, whether it be pioneers settling the West in Sequoia, to the Native Americans in Capitol Reef, or the pioneers who settled South Florida and had to deal with the swamps, as well as the Seminole and Miccosukee tribes that live down there. So the cultural and historical significance can be just as interesting and open up doors for you as a job candidate. You know, if you worked at the Liberty Bell, or you worked in Washington Monument or something like that, where it's not necessarily this mountain, but you're telling the story of the history of America or the history of a tribe. Think about the Tuskegee Airmen National Historic Park, telling the story of those people. So there's all types of things that are out there to suit your interests. But Capitol Reef was a geological paradise. And why it was cool is because all those rock layers that you see in this photo, you think about rocks being stacked one on top of another like a layered cake. Through geologic processes, these were actually tilted on their side. And so you had 19 different rock layers exposed. So as you drove west to east across the park, you would go from 275 million year old rocks to 65 million year old rocks. So you had over 200 million years of Earth history exposed at the surface. Each of those layers told a story. So you could stop and tell somebody, this was when this place was a swamp. This is when this place was sand dunes. This is when this place was a tidal flat. and you could see evidence. So that just really blew my mind to see. And when you look at the scenic beauty of a place like Capitol Reef, it was just mind blowing. And again, as you look at each of these different colored rocks, some of it's due to the iron in it, but some of what you're looking at is actually different layers of rocks. So the bottom ones being older with the newer deposited rocks on top of those. And it was just mind blowing to not only know that that history, you could touch it and see that petrified wood in those fossils, but live and breathe it. Just a beautiful place. Now, the job that I did at Capitol Reef the first time is I was called a park guide. So you have park guide positions, and these pay $13, $14 an hour. And you're on a frontline representative. So you're working in the visitor center. You're working giving informational talks, doing interpretation to guests, whether it be on geology or the Native American and cultural artifacts in the park. You know, going in the campground at night and just walking around and talking to people. Hey, how's your trip going? You need any help with anything? Oh, you want to know about the Mormon pioneers that settled here? Well, let's sit down and talk about that. So it was really just an interesting opportunity to meet people from all over the world who have come to a place that you're living and working in to share that resource. So just a really awesome experience. Now, Capitol Reef was a beautiful place. And again, I did a good job there. My supervisor was pleased with the work. And you get what's called rehire status. So next summer comes along. If you're doing okay, you can automatically get that job back without competing against hundreds of applicants who want your job, because you have what's called rehire status. Now, that's if you did a good job and they want you back. So when I came back the next summer, I had rehire status, and actually I was promoted to be the lead for the division of interpretation. So I was actually, you know, not like a second in command to the chief of interpretation, kind of facilitating some of the visitor center operations and assisting with scheduling and just kind of serving in a leadership role. So again, it goes to show you, you know, and you got to think about this. This is work, but it's something that you love and you're passionate about it and you're living in it. So it's not like, you know, they were really pulling my teeth out to get me to want to do a good job. And I think having that kind of attitude, you always see those motivational slogans. Attitude is a very important component of how people perceive your work ethic. You know, do you really enjoy what you want to do? Does it seem infectious? Do other people feed off that? So I spent 2 seasons at Capitol Reef. And during my second season, a position came open at what was called the Capitol Reef Field Station. And it's actually a public-private partnership with Utah Valley University and the National Park Service. So I left the Park Service and took this position running a field station inside of the national park. So again, they knew who I was. They knew I did a good job. I was able to get an interview and use that to land a permanent position living in Capitol Reef and working for a university. So you see this red circle down here. I lived on this remote field station in the middle of nowhere on a creek called Pleasant Creek, and I did that for 1.5 years. And it was such an interesting experience because we had college students coming in from across the country to live and stay at the field station for up to 2 weeks to learn about the cultural resources, to learn how to paint, to learn how to do photography, to learn about astronomy, to learn about physics. All those lessons could be brought inside of the national park for people to experience. So this was the valley I lived in. You see that hill right in the middle. That's where the field station actually sat on top of. And I had this whole valley to myself. There was no neighbor around me for miles. And these groups would come in and stay with me, and I was their host. We would all cook and eat together and take field trips and just interact. It was just a really cool experience. Here's a look. So you see those cliffs to the left. You could climb up those cliffs. And this is the view actually down from the top. So you see the field station sitting there. It was totally off the grid. I ran a water treatment plant. I was certified by the state to run this water treatment plant. We did all of our water on site. We had solar power. I mean, this thing was fully self-functional and could sleep 30 people. So just a really interesting place. One of the best examples of an actual working field station inside of a national park too. So there's opportunities to think about that. field stations within national forests, national parks, universities that facilitate those in a partnership with the actual park unit they're in. So just an amazing place. If you guys ever get a chance to go to Utah, it's remote. It was about 3.5 hours to the airport and fly home to Salt Lake City. My nearest grocery store was an hour away. The nearest Walmart was an hour and a half away. But it didn't matter because you were out there in this beautiful place and you had a network of friends that lived and worked in the park. And, you just learned to live differently. You couldn't go to the movie theater. You couldn't just get on the phone and call your family. So it took some transitioning, but there were still so many perks to it when you think about just living in a special place like this. And, you just go to like a Costco and bulk buy anyways, and you can survive for a long time without having to run to the gas station. But I tell you what, when you do go to town, you treat yourself. What do you want a bucket of ice cream, and you go to 3 different restaurants, you know what I mean? You need that bit of culture. So it's an interesting balance to do something like that. This is a view from up on top of that mesa, just the most awe-inspiring scenery. That mountain range in the back called the Henry Mountains was actually the last mountain range to be mapped in the continental United States. So it goes to show you how remote southern Utah is. There's probably still places out there no one ever walked. That was what was interesting about wandering around. So there was different seasons. You had snow, you had summer, obviously, you had fall. Look at the colors along Pleasant Creek. It was a perennial creek, by the way. So even though I was in a desert, I had a creek all year long. 40, 50 different kinds of wildflowers in the spring. So even the desert, the high desert, can be very green, a lot of juniper and pinyon. And the cool thing was in the heat of the summer, you could go to the mountains that surrounded you and jump up to 9,000, 10,000 feet and just be in a beautiful forest with the aspen trees and seeing the colors in the fall. So any of these places are just magic. Now, I know I'm getting short on time, but I hopefully have your attention. So some of the things I talked about, getting your foot in the door. So I am going to change my screen here. Let's see. Can you guys see the USA Jobs?
Yeah, it switched over.
Okay. So USA Jobs is the website you want to go to, and you're going to want to build a profile within that. And your resume is going to be an important part of that. But just to go in and see what opportunities are out there and apply to jobs, search something, park ranger, park guide. You can do it by state. Let's see. Oh, I got to spell correctly. Well, apparently they've changed some things. You guys know I'm a little rusty. But you can look at the agency. You could go National Park Service. And you can see all these types of jobs, and then you can filter those. You may want to look in particular states. You see the I represents the division of interpretation. So you've got maintenance workers. You've got outdoor recreation planners, managers. People have to do the revenue and the fees. Look, there you got a type 1 wildland firefighter leader. So I encourage you to look through. You can look by series to look at the different jobs. See, there's Park Ranger 303. That has to do with some of the visitor use assistant and the trail rangers. Here's your natural resource management jobs, your forestry technician. Those would actually be your fire jobs. Your biotech jobs, that's more of like your botanist and your biologist and just your general science jobs. So this is something you're going to want to get familiar with and be able to utilize and look through it. Now, granted, some jobs are seasonal and they may not be posting jobs all the time. You're going to think about in the spring and the summer, they're posting jobs for fall and winter, kind of on a different cycle. But you can actually set up emails from this where it'll email you once a week new jobs for exactly what you're looking for. So if you want to know week by week what became available, and it will tell you if some of these are seasonal or some of these are permanent. And so you're just going to have to look through that kind of stuff. See, you've got Bureau of Land Management as well. Just don't think it has to be through the National Park Service. You got the Corps of Engineers. There should be Forest Service jobs on here as well, but they're not necessarily called park rangers. So this is a full-time permanent position. So see, you get some basic information. You see the jobs open to Peace Corps and AmeriCorps folks. That's a way to get your foot in the door to do something like that. And I will tell you something that's beneficial now that they didn't have when I was with the Park Service, and that's you get credit for being a seasonal. You know, you used to not get any service credit. So, you know, if it takes 20 years to retire, all the seasonal work I did for years didn't count towards that. But now it does. So if you are a seasonal ranger, that builds up over time, and that's really going to help you long term. Let's see. So check out USA Jobs. The volunteer.gov is the other website. So this is a direct access to volunteer positions in the United States through different land management agencies. So I put Ochopee, Florida, where I used to work. We'll just do a search. You see, these are volunteer jobs. This is the one I had at Big Cypress. That was my old supervisor, Lisa. You guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, just making sure I didn't drop. So get on this website, check out those types of things. Don't be scared to take a gamble and go volunteer somewhere. I will tell you that the Park Service is a small world as much as the professional world within Mobile and Baldwin County in Alabama is. Everybody knows everybody. And so if you do a good job at Gulf Corps, other people in resource management in coastal Alabama is going to notice that. Same's in the Park Service. It may be a big unit, but if you're working with people, let's see. Did I hide all webcams? I may have. If you're doing a good job, that's going to trickle down. So if somebody is a reference, or you're looking at a job and they call up your old supervisor and say, "Hey, how did this person do?" All that stuff matters. And then the selling yourself part is your resume. I'm going to share with you guys a resume that I've kind of doctored a little bit, but it'll give you a good idea of what folks are looking for as far as in the federal world, because you got to think you're applying for jobs across the country that you don't get to fly to for an interview. So you get a phone interview or a Skype interview, but at first they've got to see who you are on paper. And so you need to be documenting all the skills that you've had, whether it be pulling invasives or running transects or working with PPE and, effectively managing and applying herbicides. All that stuff matters. And so you need to be thinking about all those knowledge, skills, and abilities you have and being able to document those so that when someone sees your resume, it's organized and well put so they can say, wow, this person knows what they're doing. I'm going to give them a call and give them an interview, hopefully. So with that, I think I'll stop as I went a few minutes over. And we'll see if you guys have any questions or anything.
Yeah, there are a few questions that pertain to kind of job searching and stuff like that. So if Boris wants to ask his question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Hey there. Thank you for the presentation. And my question was, how competitive is the seasonal hire process for the park rangers, like from your experience? And does it just depend on the park you apply for? And also, like, as an aside on my question, I want to avoid the South. I don't want to be
Yeah, well,
hot.
there's not as many, out west, and you think about out west as your big parks, your monumental parks that you see on postcards and stuff. It is highly competitive, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. That's where doing some of that stuff like volunteering and getting that on the ground experience really pays off, because you got to think you're competing against a lot of other people, and What can separate you or at least get you up the list of applicants? And they do some of this based on an answer a questionnaire when you apply for a job. And it'll ask you, have you performed this duty on a job? And it's going to help for you to be able to say yes and score, how good are you at this? Are you average? Are you above average? Or are you excellent? If it's something you've done on a job that you did consistently, you need to think of yourself as excellent. That means you were able to show someone else how to do it. So don't sell yourself short when you're filling out these questionnaires, because you are competing with hundreds of people. Now, at a bigger park like a Yellowstone, there are more jobs, but that also means there's more people that want to go work there. So again, some of it's getting a face with a name. It may be you volunteer at a park and the next season you get a job there. And it may be getting a job at a park that you don't necessarily like, or it wasn't your idea choice, but you've got to put in the work and the effort to get there. Like I said, I got lucky and went to some parks that I never even knew about, and I fell in love with them. But it was that opportunity that I was offered that I took advantage of that led to those things. So it's just putting in the work, having the right attitude, and having a little bit of luck. I'm a big believer. So, it's not going to happen right away, but you just got to keep working at it. And don't get discouraged when it doesn't. It takes time. There was people when I was a seasonal ranger who were seasonals for forever and never got permanent jobs. There's more people that want to work for the parks forever than ever, particularly in your generation. So, what else you got?
All right. And then one last job question Cody wanted to ask. Cody?
How beneficial would it be to have law enforcement experience to get a park ranger job?
Great question. That's actually a really great question. If you go there, there's some colleges, I think Slippery Rock is one of them. They actually offer law enforcement degrees, not necessarily criminal justice, but they're almost like a Park Service law enforcement degree. And back then, I wasn't interested in being a law enforcement officer just because that's a commitment. You know what I mean? You're in a real life position where you're a true law enforcement officer. So it wasn't quite for me, although I did consider it. But yes, there are certain ranger jobs that only law enforcement officers can get. And so that's a great way to give yourself an advantage to those particular positions. I will say there's other things that you can do once you actually get in the Park Service to kind of separate yourself. One of them may be that red card. One of them may be some people go get their EMT, because if you're a backcountry ranger, in certain positions you have to have an EMT license so that you're able to really have those skills that are needed that other applicants may not, that they want for that position. So those are things you want to look at down the road, maybe at EMT and stuff like that. But law enforcement can certainly get you jobs that no one else except law enforcement people can compete for.
Okay, and then we have a lot of more personal kind of questions. Austin wants to know about your wildlife encounters. Austin, you want to ask?
I was just asking if you had any interesting animal encounters during your travels.
Yeah, certainly. There was only, they say there's only about 150 Florida panthers around in South Florida. I was able to see a couple. They were far away and they were running away, but just to see something that was that endangered, I thought was really cool. Sometimes we would go into our trail where we took the kids out on their field trip, and there would be fresh panther tracks. And we were never worried that this panther was stalking us, but to think that where we were the day before, over the night, a Florida panther was walking through there. Obviously, I've seen a billion gators. I've kayaked and canoed with gators. Manatee used to come into the area that they actually came in the area that we lived in the park, because there was kind of creeks and canals, and these manatees would come live behind the house. And just to see manatees on a regular occasion was a really unique opportunity. Let's see. I have been able to work and with fox squirrels. They had a threatened species of fox squirrel in South Florida. Just to go on a tracking field trip to go out and look for those. Seen some black bear. Let's see, desert bighorn sheep out in Utah. I've had a close encounter with a few animals just out in the wild. You know, when you sit in these wilderness areas and you're downwind, you never know what may walk up the same creek bed as you. I had a bobcat sneak up on me one time, just to see one, you know, at 10 feet, and him not even, you know, just kind of have an encounter with one. Unique stuff like that. But even small things like birds and just seeing animals in their natural behavior, it really makes a difference. You're just out in these wilderness places where they're not used to people in. You're just minding your own business, hanging out, observing things. You never know what you may see.
Do you remember what kind of fox squirrels it was you were tracking?
It is called the big cypress fox squirrel. It's a subspecies of fox squirrel that's kind of, I guess, unique to that area.
Okay, so we've heard a lot about the cool parts of the job. Haley wants to know about some of the difficulties. So Haley, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I will. So when you were doing like outreach and education, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced or had to overcome with that?
That's a good question. I think it's fair. Obviously, it's not all glitz and glam. Sometimes you're dealing with, you know, when you're dealing with kids and sixth graders, you know, sometimes you have some that aren't the most well behaved, or, you know, maybe they don't have the same level of understanding as other kids, and I see that as an opportunity, you know, to challenge your leadership skills. To, you know, how are you going to manage this situation? You think about the same working with the public. When you were talking in a visitor center to hundreds of people a day, you know, there was some redundancy there. You get the same question. People would want to, in the Park Service, there's kind of some funny things where people would come in and they go, what do I want to see here? You know, what's the most beautiful thing I should see? And I go, well, walk outside. Looks pretty good, right? And they'd be like, no, I want to know, you know, or I've got 1 hour. What should I do? You know, and so you're dealing with a lot of repetition there. Obviously, sometimes you're going to get some guests who are upset. You know, maybe they can't have their pet on the trail. Maybe they're just not having a good day. And so we just try to remind those people that, you know, hey, you caught a bad break, but, you know, you're on vacation. You're in a beautiful place. You know, turn that frown upside down kind of thing. Certainly anything you're doing frontline representative, whether you're working in Chick-fil-A or Walmart, when you see so many people, you're gonna see all kind of personalities. So it's just remembering to always be professional, handle yourself in a professional manner, and try to defuse any situations or de-escalate any situations that you come across. But again, at the end of the day, you got to go home, and you're living and sleeping in these special places, and you just got to look at the big picture. We're all going to run up against obstacles or difficulties. It's just how do you see those in the grand scheme of things?
Awesome. Well, we only have about 1 minute left, and I know Jason, I think we're both getting on that apple snail call in a minute. So if anybody has a last burning question, go ahead and ask it. If not, I think we'll wrap things up and tell Jason thank you. Okay. Well, thanks, Jason.
Well, I appreciate it, and I'm going to send you that resume so you can share it with everyone and they can just take a look at it. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Believe me, it was a lot to condense down, and there's probably some things I forgot, but hopefully it made some sense to you and you can use some of this to keep trudging forward. And I'm always around. Y'all know how to get in touch with me, and if there's some specific questions or things that I didn't address, I'll be happy to chat with you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely send out your contact info in that resume. Thanks for that. All right. Thanks again. And leaders, I think you can let everybody know what's happening next.